Argo Station's training shuttle landed on the quiet surface of Valdamoon just after sunrise. Red rocks stretched far under a purple sky. 6 cadets stepped out, 5 aliens, and 1 human. They wore shiny cadet uniforms and carried backpacks, full of tools and survival gear. This mission was simple: survive 5 days without help. No space station support, no auto-delivery drones, just the team and the tools they brought. Their main food came from sealed ration packs stored inside the shuttle's cooler. Each cadet came from a different species. There was Zelik, a tall, bug-like creature with long arms. Tali was a glowing-skinned girl from a cold water planet. Rock, the short and loud one, had thick red fur. The others were just as different, but they were all smart and proud. Then there was Brian, the only human in the team. He had short brown hair, simple boots, and a relaxed look on his face. He didn't talk much. He just listened. On day 1, they built a small camp near a rock hill. Tents were set up. They took samples of the local plants and sent back silent data to the academy. They laughed and joked during lunch, enjoying their ration packs filled with energy paste and flavored gels. But by nightfall, things went wrong. "Why does the cooler smell weird?" Tali asked, sniffing the air. ROKK opened the cooler hatch. A wave of rotten, sticky stench hit everyone. The storage lights blinked red. "No, no, no," Rock shouted. "The main food supply is spoiled." Everyone gathered around, staring into the mess. Packets were swollen and leaking. Black spots floated inside the gel. The cooler's power cell had failed silently. All their stored food was. Now useless. Panic spread fast. "This isn't happening," Tali shouted, clutching her head. "We'll starve," cried Zelto, the smallest of them. "We can't make it 5 days like this." Zelik tried to calm them. "We'll find a solution. Maybe we can fix the cell." Rock stomped. "Even if we fix it, the food's already dead." While everyone shouted, Brian stood quietly, sipping water from his bottle, sat on a rock and looked at the purple sky. Xelik noticed and walked over. "Human, aren't you worried?" Brian looked up. "Nope. Do you understand the situation?" "Yep." Zelik's voice clicked in confusion. "Our food is gone. We have nothing left except basic tools. We didn't bring farming kits. What do you plan to eat?" Brian stretched his arms and said calmly, "I buried my meat yesterday." Silence fell. Rock blinked. "You what?" "Buried it," Brian said again. "Wrapped and sealed. Underground." The cadets looked at one another, then burst out laughing. "Are you serious?" Tali asked. "You stored food in the dirt?" Zelto said with wide eyes. Brian nodded. "Wrapped it tight in earth plastic. Dug down, left it in a shaded spot. The ground here stays cool." Zelik narrowed his eyes. "Why would you do that?" Brian smiled a little. "Because machines break." The laughter faded. Slowly realization crept into their minds. While they trusted their tech, the human trusted the ground. "Wait, is your food still safe?" Zelto asked, hopeful. Brian stood. "Want to find out?" They followed him over a ridge, past jagged rocks, to a flat area near a small dry stream. Brian knelt, dug through some light stones, and pulled out a hidden bundle. He unwrapped the outer cover and showed thick, frozen-looking slabs wrapped inside a clear case. No smell. No rot. Just clean red meat. ROKK leaned closer. "What even is this?" "Jerky and frozen slices," Brian said. "It's from Earth cows." Tali looked shocked. "You eat animals?" Brian just said, "Yep." The cadets stared. Their species used paste and grown synth food. No one had tasted real animal meat before. Xelik finally spoke. "We may not be used to this, but if it keeps us alive." Brian shrugged. "Suits me. I brought enough to share." They carried the meat back to camp and cooked some over a small heat disk. The smell filled the air, strong, rich, smoky. It made their mouths water. ROKK was the first to try. His eyes widened. "This is incredible." Tali tasted next. Warm. Chewy, salty. It's strange, but I like it. Brian nodded. "Human food. It's messy, but it works. By nightfall, the cadets' fear had faded. Their stomachs were full. Their minds were calmer. They realized something simple but powerful. Brian had saved them. As the others cleaned up and discussed next steps, Brian found a flat rock, lay down, and put his hands behind his head. He looked up at the stars and closed his eyes. "Not worried at all?" Zelek asked as he passed by. Brian smiled. "Not really." "Why?" "Because I sleep like a baby when I'm full." Morning came quietly on Valdamoon. The sun rose low and red over the rocks, casting long shadows across the camp. The space cadets slowly climbed out of their tents. Their faces still showed worry, but their steps felt lighter than the day before. Smell of cooked meat still hung in the air from last night. It had brought them hope, but questions remained. Exalee walked over to Brian, who was already up, sitting near the edge of the hill, sharpening a metal stick with a flat stone. "Human," Zelek said. "Your meat saved us, but we still have 4 days left. How much did you bury?" "Enough," Brian said without looking up. "Won't be a feast every time, but we won't starve." Rock joined them, chewing on a dry piece of jerky. "Your way's weird, Brian. No machines, no codes. Just dirt and meat." Brian smiled. "Works better than a broken cooler?" Tali walked closer, her silver eyes curious. "How did you even think of doing this?" Brian stood and pointed at the ground. "On Earth, our ancestors did it all the time. We didn't always have fridges, cold ground, shade, and wrapping. It's basic, but it works." Zelto, the smallest cadet with glowing blue skin, tilted his head. "Don't humans trust tech?" "We do," Brian answered. "But we trust ourselves more." The cadets looked at one another. None of their instructors had ever taught them anything like this. Everything in their training relied on advanced tools, auto cookers, and backup drones. Brian looked around. At the rocky land, this moon's quiet. But if the wind picks up, that slope will turn cold. We should move our tents behind the hill. They followed his advice. Together, they shifted camp, using heavy rocks to anchor their tents. Showed them how to use flat stones to build windbreaks. Later that day, Brian walked the group to a dry stream and showed them how to test the soil. "See this?" he said, picking up a plant with wide roots. "It grows here, the ground's good," Rock frowned. "But we're not planting anything." "Not now," Brian said, "but if we needed to, we could. It tells us the soil's not poisoned, might be water under it." Zelto bent down and touched the dirt. "It's cool, like the inside of our ship." Brian nodded. "And good for storing food. We could even dig a cold pit for extras." For the rest of the day, the cadets worked. They dug a larger hole and lined it with clean rocks. Brian helped seal the remaining meat inside. This time, they wrapped it in extra layers to make sure no scent leaked out. By evening, they had new shelter, a food pit, and even a lookout spot built from stone slabs. As the orange sun set, the cadets gathered near the small heat disk to eat. Brian roasted thin strips of meat, showing them how to cook it slowly so it wouldn't burn. Rock closed his eyes and smiled. "This is better than paste." Zelek stared at the fire, thoughtful. "I never thought I'd enjoy Earth food." Brian poked the fire and said, "You enjoy it more when you earn it." Suddenly, a low howl echoed from the far rocks. Tal sat up straight. "What was that?" Zelto's eyes widened. It didn't sound friendly. Zelek stood and looked toward the sound. "The moon has wild creatures. Some hunt at night." Calmly took a stick from his pack, sharpened to a point. "Don't worry, we'll be fine." Rock laughed nervously. "You're calm like it's normal." Brian smiled. "On Earth, we had wolves, bears, big cats. We made fire and stayed close. Predators hate firelight. They watch, but don't come close." The howl echoed again, this time farther away. Tali looked at the flames. "So we just stay near the fire." Brian nodded. "Keep it going. Don't run. Don't show fear." Zelek hesitated, but then sat down near the fire. One by one, the others followed. They stayed quiet, listening, watching. The strange howl never came closer. After a while, Zelto whispered, "How do you sleep in places like this?" Brian yawned and laid back. "I got used to it. Humans adapt. Our bodies adjust. Just need a full belly and some warmth." Zelek looked at the others. "He's right. We can't panic every time something strange happens. This is part of survival." They nodded. Slowly, the tension faded. The cadets leaned back, watching the stars above. Brian closed his eyes and muttered, "Tomorrow, I'll show you how to make a water trap." "What's that?" Tally asked. Brian smiled without opening his eyes. "A way to catch clean water from air." "Grrr!" The cadets stared at him in surprise. Even now, the human had more to teach. As they rested near the soft firelight, the cadets realized something. Brian wasn't just a teammate. He was their guide. The one who didn't panic when things went wrong. The one who had buried meat, built shelters, and faced the night without fear. And as he quietly drifted to sleep again, breathing slowly under the stars, the others sat a little closer to the fire and felt safe. A thin layer of mist covered the ground when the cadets woke up. Their tents were still standing strong, thanks to the windbreaks they built with Brian's help. The cold air stung their skin, but none of them complained. They were learning too. Deal with it. Brian stood near the fire, poking it with a long stick. "Rise and shine," he said softly. "We've got things to do." Zelto rubbed his eyes. "What now?" Brian pointed to the sky. "See that cloud? Means a storm might be coming later today. We'll need water before that." Tolly blinked. "But we don't have a water filter." "Don't need one," Brian said with a small smile. "I'll show you a trick." The cadets followed him past the stream to a quiet spot with soft soil. Brian pulled out a clear plastic sheet and began digging a hole. Then he placed a small empty cup in the center. "This is called a solar water trap," Brian explained. "The sun heats the ground, moisture rises, and it gathers on the plastic. Then it drips into the cup." Rock scratched his head. "It's simple things work," Brian said. "Just give it a few hours." As the others helped make more water traps, Zelek stayed behind, staring at the nearby hills. He had heard something during the night. Soft footsteps. Not wind. Not echoes. When Brian returned to check the traps, Zelek walked over. "I think something was near the camp last night," Zelek said quietly. Brian didn't look surprised. "I know, I saw movement. Why didn't you wake us?" "No need." "It stayed far, just watching." Zelek frowned. "We should prepare." Brian nodded. "We will. Tonight, we'll make noise, light more fire, hang meat scents high, away from camp. Let them sniff something that's not us." Zelek didn't fully understand the human's plan, but he trusted him now. As evening came, they had gathered enough water for the next day. The meat was still fresh in the underground pit. They roasted small portions again, but this time, Brian tied a piece of meat to a long branch and stuck it high between two rocks. "What's that for?" Tolly asked. "Bait," Brian answered. "If something's watching, it'll check that out first." Zelto looked around. "Do you think they'll attack?" "Maybe," Brian said calmly. "But not if they're unsure." Rock raised a brow. "Unsure of what?" "US." The cadets sat closer that night. They kept the fire burning tall. Brian showed them how to make whistles from small tubes and dry grass. Every few minutes, one cadet blew a whistle, filling the air with sharp sounds. It echoed off the rocks. "Predators don't like sudden noise," Brian explained. "Makes them nervous." Sometime after midnight, they heard its soft scraping. On stone, footsteps, slow and careful. Zelto gripped his stick tightly. "Something's here." Brian stood and motioned everyone to stay calm. "Don't run, stay by the fire." A pair of glowing eyes appeared at the edge of the camp. Large, oval-shaped, low to the ground. Then another set, and another. 3 shadowy figures watched from a distance. Long bodies, low legs, thick tails. The cadets were frozen, but Brian didn't move. He stepped forward, held up a torch of fire, and shouted a single loud word, Go. The shadows flinched. The firelight shook. The creatures growled, low and unsure. Brian threw the torch forward. It landed on the rocks, flames licking into the dark. The shadows backed away. Slowly, silently, then vanished. No one spoke for a long minute. Rock let out a breath. They're gone, Tali whispered. What are those? Don't know, Brian said, sitting back down. But they're not brave. Zelik nodded slowly. You were right. Fire, sound, confidence. It worked. Creatures test weakness, Brian said, but we showed them strength. Zelto looked at him with wide eyes. You didn't even pick up a weapon. Didn't need to, Brian replied. Sometimes survival is about the message you send. They didn't sleep much that night, but they weren't afraid anymore. They had faced danger and held their ground. By morning, the meat on the branch was gone. It's torn and chewed. They took the bait, Brian said, inspecting the claw marks on the rock. But they didn't come closer. The cadets gathered around, looking at the marks. This was your plan all along, Zelik said. Part of it, Brian answered. It's not just about tools. It's about how you think. Stay calm, plan ahead, adapt fast. Tali smiled. You really are a strange human, Brian chuckled. That's what makes us good at this. As they cleaned the camp, the cadets moved with new confidence. They no longer waited for orders. They worked together using what Brian had taught them. And while they built more traps, repaired shelter walls, and kept the fire going, Brian sat on his rock again, sharpening a stick, watching the sky. His ears stayed open. His hands stayed busy. But his eyes were calm. Just another day for the Earthling, who buried his meat underground, slept like a baby. The fourth morning on Valdamoon started with a strange silence. The wind had stopped. The sky looked darker, even though the sun had already risen. Thin clouds stretched like scars across the sky, and the air felt thick. Brian stood near the lookout point, his eyes focused on the sky. Zelik joined him with a serious face. Is it time? Zelik asked. Brian nodded. Storm's close. Big one. Rock ran up behind them, holding his gear. What kind of storm? Magnetic, Brian replied. Your scanners won't work. Communications will go out. Lightning without rain. Dangerous stuff. Tali stared at her wrist pad. The screen was flickering. He's right. System's acting weird already. Zelto looked nervous, so what do we do? Brian turned and pointed toward the hills. I found a cave on day 1. It's dry and deep. We'll move there before the storm hits. Zelik hesitated. We don't even know how strong this storm will be. Strong enough to fry our shelter. If we stay, Brian said. You saw what happened to your food cooler. We can't trust tech right now, none of them argued. They packed quickly. Tents were taken down, gear rolled tight. Brian led the way, carrying one end of the meat pit's wrapped bundle. Zelto helped carry the other. The wind picked up as they reached the hill. Dust began to swirl around their boots. Brian found the narrow cave entrance just behind a fallen rock. He pushed away the loose stones, and a cool breeze came from inside. Here, he said. It stays warm enough inside to sleep, won't trap moisture, and most important, it's not made of metal. Cadets crawled inside one by one. Space opened into a round room carved by nature with smooth walls and a sandy floor. It was perfect. They set up their heat disk in the center and stacked rocks to block the wind at the entrance. Brian showed them how to hang gear from hooks made with sticks and stone cracks. As they settled in, first flash lit up the caves. Opening, a sound like a deep crack echoed across the sky. The ground rumbled slightly. Zell too jumped. That was lightning. That was the start, Brian said. Outside, the sky turned orange. Strange lights danced in the clouds, waves of energy, pulsed in the air. The cadets stayed close inside, watching as the storm hit hard. Sudden blasts shook the ground. Bright flashes made shadows twist on the walls, but the cave held strong. No rain, no metal, no power grids to fry. They waited in silence for hours. Listening, Fani finally whispered, How did you know this cave would be safe? Brian leaned back against the wall. I didn't. I just guessed right. Rock laughed a little. Seriously. Seriously, Brian said with a small grin. Humans guess all the time. We make choices. We fail. Then we learn. That's what makes us dangerous. Zelek folded his arms. You're not just guessing. You're reading the land. Trusting your senses. Brian looked at him. Yeah, because sometimes that's all you've got. Another flash lit the cave. Entrance. The wind howled outside, but no one panicked. They felt protected, safe inside the quiet stone room. As the storm passed slowly, Brian unwrapped a small piece of jerky from their food bundle. He chewed quietly, then passed it to Rock. Eat a little. Keeps the nerves steady, he said. Zeltu leaned against Tali, eyes heavy. How do you stay so calm during everything? Brian looked around at them, because panic wastes energy. Fear is normal, but if you let it control you, you lose. Humans learned that long ago. Zelek looked out at the cave's mouth. The storm was still glowing. Your people must have gone through a lot. Brian nodded. We had storms, wars, quakes, wild animals, diseases. We didn't always have spaceships. It's just stone and fire. But we kept going. Tali smiled. Now we're learning from you. We're learning from each other, Brian said. You all trusted me. That means something. The cadets rested through the night. No one could sleep deeply with the storm. Still roaring, they weren't afraid. By dawn, the sky had cleared. The air felt fresh again. The sun returned, shining over the red hills. They stepped out of the cave slowly. The storm had passed. Small rocks were scattered everywhere. The camp they left behind was gone. Tents, ripped, tools scattered, antenna melted. Zelta gasped. Our shelter. Zelek checked the spot where their camp once stood. If we had stayed there, it'd be part of the dust, Brian said. The group stood quietly. They looked at each other not with fear, but with respect. Tali picked up a broken piece of her scanner. Everything's fried. No signal. Rock kicked a rock. How do we even call the rescue team now? Brian took a deep breath and looked. At the sun, they'll come in 2 days like planned. We survive until then. We've done it this long. We'll do it again. Salik placed a hand on Brian's shoulder. We'll follow your lead. Brian nodded. Good. First thing we do, get water, then rebuild a small shelter near the cave. Keep our meat safe, and maybe sharpen a few more sticks. They laughed a little at that as they got to work. The cadets moved like a team now. They listened, acted fast, and trusted each other. Their minds were sharp. Their fear was gone. Brian watched them work with quiet pride. They had changed, and deep inside he knew something important this wasn't just survival training anymore. This was real. The sun climbed higher over Valdamoon. Dust sparkled in the morning air. Broken pieces of their old camp still scattered the rocks, but the cadets didn't stop to stare anymore. They had a new plan and a better leader, one who didn't care. About broken tech, Brian. They followed him now without question. The cave is our shelter, Brian said, pointing back at the rock formation. But we need a second spot, something open, in case the cave gets blocked again. Rock grinned. You want a camps? Not really a camp, Brian replied. A backup zone. Always have options. That's what survival is, they found. A spot between 2 large boulders. Together, they stacked stones and built low walls. Brian showed them how to weave dry grass into wind-blocking mats. Even Zelto helped, tying knots with his glowing fingers. As they worked, Tali looked at Brian and asked, Where did you learn all this? Brian smiled. My grandfather. He took me camping every year. No drones, no screens, just sky, trees, and dirt. Zelek nodded. Your planet trains its people well. Not everyone, Brian said. But we had to adapt. Earth wasn't easy. That's why humans are tough. While the others built, Brian climbed a nearby hill. He crouched low, scanning the area with just his eyes. ROKK called out. What are you looking for? Tracks, Brian answered. He pointed to the ground. Faint lines ran through the dust-white prints with 3 sharp toes. Something large had passed through recently. Lakay walked over. They came back. Maybe just one, Brian said. And it's curious. Cadets gathered closer. Brian knelt and touched the marks. Still fresh. It's not more than an hour ago. Zelto swallowed. Should we run? Brian shook his head. No. We need to test what we've learned. Tali frowned. What do you mean? We build a scare zone, Brian said. Something loud, something bright. If it works, the creature backs off. If it doesn't, he shrugged. We adapt again. The cadets worked together fast. They used shiny metal scraps from their broken scanner plates. Brian taught them to tie the pieces with vine-like roots and hang them from rocks. When the wind blew, the metal clanged and spun, reflecting light everywhere. They also sharpened more sticks. Even rock got serious now. As the day moved toward evening, the cadets finished their traps and stood near the lookout point. Brian pointed at the sky. Tonight is our test. We'll eat light, keep the fire low, and wait. Tali whispered, You're sure it will come? I'm not sure about anything, Brian said. But it's better to be ready than sorry. Night came fast. The stars blinked above. The fire flickered gently. The wind started moving the hanging metal plates. A soft clanging echoed through the rocks. The cadets sat silently, holding their sticks. Even Zelto didn't fidget a growl. Broke the silence. Low, heavy. Just past the outer rocks. Brian stood first. He motioned to the others to stay still. A shadow moved near the edge of the light. A large creature, twice the size of any of them, stepped forward. Long legs, thick hide, sharp eyes that glowed faint red. It stepped closer. Clang. One of the metal traps spun wildly in the wind. The creature flinched. Clang. Clang. More traps joined in. Reflections bounced off the rocks. The fire's light danced across the creature's face. It growled again, but this time it backed away. Clang. The sound echoed loud, like a broken bell. Then silence. The shadow turned and disappeared into the dark. The cadet stayed frozen for a few seconds. Then Zelto whispered, It's gone. Brian lowered his stick. For now, Zelik looked around at the traps. It worked. Noise and light, Brian said. Most wild animals fear what they don't understand. Rock. Let out a long breath. I thought we were dead. Tali smiled. We didn't panic. Zelto nodded quickly, stayed calm. Brian sat down and reached into the meat bundle. He tossed a small dried strip to each cadet. Good job, he said. You all passed the test. Zelik blinked. This was a test. Not by the academy, Brian said, but by the wild. And you passed. The fire crackled as they ate. There was no fear in their eyes now, only pride. ROKK chuckled. You think they'll make us instructors after this? Tali grinned. Only if we survive one more day. Brian laid back against a rock and closed his eyes. We will, he said softly. We're stronger now. The cadets sat in a tight circle. The stars above sparkled like tiny fires. Their backup shelter stood tall nearby. The traps clanged. Gently in the wind, like a lullaby. No one said it out loud, but they all felt it. They weren't the same group that had panicked over spoiled rations days ago. They were survivors. The sixth day dawned quiet and calm. The purple sky was clear, and the red rocks shone under the warm sun. The cadets stood near their backup shelter, faces bright with hope. The storm had passed, the wild test had been faced, and now only one thing remained: rescue. Brian sat on a flat stone, chewing on a small strip of jerky. He watched his team work, checking traps, cleaning gear, preparing for the journey home. Exlick walked up and said, You taught us well, human. We have learned more in these days than all other trainings combined. Brian smiled, but his eyes stayed sharp. It's not just about what I taught. It's about how you listened, how you worked together. Tali nodded. We couldn't have done it without you. Rock slapped Brian on the back. You saved our skins, man. Zelto grinned and held up a small water bottle. We caught water all by ourselves. Good job, Brian said. That's what counts. Far above, a faint hum grew louder. The rescue ship was near. The cadets gathered at the lookout, scanning the sky. A sleek silver ship appeared, its engines glowing blue. It moved fast and steady. The familiar symbol of the Academy shone bright on its hull. Finally, Tolly whispered. The ship landed gently on the rock surface. The hatch opened with a hiss. 2 instructors stepped out, stern faces, sharp eyes, dressed in official uniforms. They looked around, taking in the scene. Broken tents, stone shelters, sharpened sticks, and a circle of calm, confident cadets. 1 instructor, a tall, gray-skinned alien, frowned. "What happened here?" Zelek stepped forward. "We survived." The other instructor raised an eyebrow. "Your food supply was lost." "Your comms were down. How did you manage?" Brian spoke calmly. "We adapted. Buried meat, natural shelters, fire, traps, water collection. We used old methods and common sense." The instructors exchanged surprised glances. "Your group looks well-fed and healthy," said the first instructor. "Not like other teams we have lost." Brian shrugged. "We stayed together, kept calm, worked as a team." The instructors walked among the cadets, inspecting their gear, watching their steady movements. "You even made these traps," the second instructor said, pointing to the metal hangings. "And these shelters?" "Yes," Zelek replied proudly. "We learned from the human." The instructors looked at Brian. He led them. "I helped," Brian said humbly. "They did the work." The first instructor nodded slowly. "We underestimated old ways." "Sometimes the old ways are best when the new ones fail," Brian said. The instructors called the cadets to line up. Each one stood tall, proud, and calm. The lead instructor spoke. "This mission was a test, but also a real challenge. You passed, thanks to leadership and teamwork." Brian's heart warmed, but he stayed quiet. The cadets smiled and whispered among themselves. They were no longer scared kids. They were survivors, warriors even. As the rescue ship prepared to leave, Brian looked at the moon's rocky surface. One last time, Exlick came beside him. "Will you teach more teams like this?" Brian laughed softly. "If they want to learn." Tali smiled. "We want to learn." Rock nodded. "Me too." Zelto added, "We won't panic next time." The ship lifted off smoothly. The purple moon faded beneath them, inside the ship. The instructors wrote reports and praised Brian and his team. The humans' methods saved them all. One said, "We must add these old skills to future trainings." The other agreed. Brian sat back and thought about Earth, his home, where people survive storms, wild animals, and hard lands without fancy machines. He knew this was only the beginning. Space was big, wild, unpredictable, but with patience, calm, and old knowledge, humans and their friends could survive anything. And as Brian closed his eyes, he smiled. He was ready for whatever came next.